Hey, Shell Point, back again here with Professor Kerr, talking about our next in our series of the ancient history of Rome. This session is on January 27th, 4:30 to 6 p.m. in the Grand Cypress Room. Well, here we are, Professor Kerr. At this point, describe to us how big the Roman Empire is and maybe some of the interesting and historical facts that have led it to this point.
Thank you, John. Yes, we start this talk with the greatest extent of the Roman Empire. Okay. So it carries on from the Scottish border down to Baghdad. Oh, wow. Not always can it be that large. They do retreat somewhat, but this is the period of the 5 good emperors. And the trick here was that the good emperors, over a period of 150 years, nominated their successor. It wasn't necessarily a son or a family member. They would just identify the most able person that they knew. It could be a senator, unlikely, or it could be a government official, or it could be a military leader. And they would adopt them a few years before they died, obviously, and then they would groom them to take over. And that's why we have this period of the 5 good emperors, because they had the wisdom to actually realize that the worst thing you can do is leaving the empire empty. In other words,
not prepared for the future.
Not prepared for the future. So those 5 were very diligent and produced heirs, which then followed on with no civil wars. This was the height of the Roman Empire. Okay. And the people who have done research into Rome say this is the best time to be alive in the Roman Empire. Okay.
Now, was this the time with the rise of Christianity and Constantine and all that?
Yes.
Okay.
And it's exactly at this time with the 5 good emperors who expanded the empire to its largest extent, often traveling. Sometimes they spend 2/3 of their lives traveling. And meanwhile, back at home, Christianity, which was now 150 years old, is beginning to have its impact. Not in terms of the numbers of people, because in this time it never was more than 10 to 12% of the total population. But Christians had something going for them. One, they cared for other people. Secondly, they would read their holy book, and that meant they were very educated. And because they're more educated than most Romans, they got to positions of high control in the government. And so they began to be influential in the way in which they interacted in the day-to-day operation of the empire. So now Christianity is growing in terms of population, but it's also growing in terms of influence. But we have this friction between the bishops of Rome and the bishops of other great capital cities, who all interpret the holy books in a different way.
Okay.
And so when Constantine fights his way to the top of the tree, so to speak, with the help of Christian soldiers in his army, he stops the persecution of Christians, which he promised to do, and he also locks all the bishops in his summer palace and says, don't come out until you've actually thrashed out what the good book is going to look like. And particularly the issue that really was challenging Christianity at that time was the Trinity, God the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost, because today it's accepted. In those days, there were people who disagreed with that.
It was the first I'd ever heard of that type of concept.
And they're called the Arians, and they still conduct their version of Christianity, but they don't link the 3. So that was the growth of Christianity. But of course, in time, the expansion of Rome had put tremendous pressure on finances and military. So the military was getting forever bigger and bigger, costing money, and the 2 areas where they were constantly fighting was one in Persia, the Parthians, and that went on for 200 years. And that was a major drawdown of Rome energy. And the other was the Danube, where the barbarians on the other side of the Danube were constantly trying to get across. So there were wars going on for the best part of 100 years on and off, both on the Danube and down in Persia. And this eventually wore out Rome, and so they had to divide the currency. There's also a plague where 20% of the population died. And the pressures on Rome are now forming cracks in the structure. And we know this in the form of around about 400 AD. We start to see the Goths, the Visigoths, the Vandals, the Huns, the barbarians moving in on the edges of Rome, crossing over the Danube, and now attacking the major cities.
I'm interested to hear how how Rome was at its peak, and it was things that they would say made it this empire running well. To then you're saying these different issues that arose that developed these cracks, which ultimately led to the demise of the empire.
Indeed. And we think that around about 450 AD, when Rome fell to the Goths and then fell again to the Vandals and was pretty much destroyed, that was the end of Rome. But in fact, we have to remind ourselves that the empire had actually moved east, and Constantinople
that's right.
was now a major city, not the capital, but a very major city.
Yes.
And they chose Constantinople, Istanbul today, because the emperor could respond to the pressure points, which are the Danube, which is closer, and Persia, which is closer. So Constantine did a good job, but unfortunately the pressures were too great, and the barbarians were too strong, and the West collapsed.
And we'll have more of that in session 5, right?
will.
All right. Once again, this is session 4 with the history of ancient Rome that is taking place on January 27th, 4:30 to 6 p.m. in the Grand Cypress Room. See you there.